He almost didn't pull the file. His boxes were packed. The retirement card had already been signed, passed around, tucked back into an envelope on Karen's desk. He had 37 minutes until his last walkthrough, and 2 hours after that until the party in the break room. He had done everything asked of him. He had done more than was asked. And when the new supervisor said what he said that morning, offhand, casual, the way people say things they don't think will land, Ray stood very still for a moment. Then he walked quietly back to the archive room. Raymond Pollock had worked at the Hartfield fabrication plant for 35 years. He started on the floor at 23, made supervisor at 31, and spent the next 24 years knowing every machine, every maintenance cycle, every person who had ever worked a shift in that building. He knew which conveyor belts ran hot in summer. He knew which loading dock door had been misaligned since 2014 and would jam if you let it swing past 40 degrees. He knew which of his guys were careful and which cut corners, and he managed them accordingly. He was not a man who liked drama. He was not a man who made enemies. He was the kind of man who showed up, did the work, and went home. His wife Rita had been waiting 35 years for the day he would finally be there to have coffee with her in the morning. Marco Reyes had worked under Ray for 11 years. He was not the fastest on the floor, but he was consistent and thorough, the kind of man who never left a job half done and always put tools back where they belonged. He had a wife named Celia and 2 kids. Ray had attended both their birthday parties, years ago, before the kids were old enough to find that kind of thing embarrassing. He knew their names. He knew the whole family. Marco died on a Thursday night in March 3 years ago. Ray wasn't there. He had taken a sick day, something he almost never did, but he had a fever of 101 and Rita had told him in no uncertain terms that he was not driving to the plant. He spent that day in bed, and at 11:40 that night his phone rang, and he drove to the plant anyway the next morning, in the cold, without thinking much else. The official account said the guarding on a conveyor line had failed. A mechanical fault. OSHA investigated, issued a citation, fined the company. Marco's family received a settlement. The case closed. Ray had told himself, over 3 years, that it would not have mattered if he had been there. That accidents happen, that the investigation had found what it found. The new supervisor's name was Derek. He had been at Hartfield 4 months. That morning he had been talking to Ray about the records transfer, moving old files to the off-site archive before the fiscal year closed, a routine task. In passing he mentioned he had gone through the 2023 maintenance logs the week before and straightened a few things out. He said it the way you say it when you mean you reorganized some folders. He said, honestly, some of those certifications were a mess. I just cleaned them up so the auditors don't ask questions. Ray had said yes and nodded and walked halfway down the hall before he stopped. He stood there for a moment, holding a folder he was supposed to be delivering to the front office. Then he turned around. The archive room was at the far end of the administrative corridor, behind a door that required a key most people had lost or forgotten over the years. Ray still had his original copy on his ring. He unlocked it, turned on the overhead fluorescent, and stood for a moment among the metal shelving units that held 30 years of paper records in gray binders with handwritten spine labels. There was a small table against one wall, a metal chair beside it. The room smelled faintly of machine oil and old paper and something electrical he had never been able to identify. He had been in this room hundreds of times, and it had always had this quality, of holding things quietly, without commentary. The plant had moved to digital logging in late 2024. Before that, paper backups had run parallel to the digital system, and when the transfer was done Ray had flagged it twice in writing as incomplete. No one had acted on the flag. The paper records had never been formally decommissioned. They were still here. He pulled the 2023 binder for line maintenance and found March. He had submitted a guard repair work order for line 7 on March 3rd. He remembered this precisely. During the previous week's inspection he had noticed wear on the guard housing, not critical, but enough to document. He had written it up himself, submitted the order to the maintenance team, and logged a note that line 7 should run reduced output until the repair was certified complete. It was the kind of thing he did automatically, the kind of thing he had always done. The log showed the repair certified complete on March 8th. Ray turned back several pages to the maintenance personnel records for that period and looked for one name. Gary Trout had been the maintenance technician certified for that class of equipment. He was the person who should have done the repair, and he was the person whose signature appeared on the March 8th certification. Ray was certain, before he even confirmed it, of what he was going to find. He found it anyway. Gary had fractured his wrist on February 27th. He had slipped on ice in the parking lot during the storm that week. Ray had processed the medical leave paperwork himself. He remembered Gary sitting across from his desk, holding his arm at an odd angle, looking embarrassed about it. Gary's medical leave ran from February 28th through March 19th. Ray found the return to work form still tucked in the same binder. The certification was signed on March 8th. Gary Trout had not been in the building on March 8th. Ray sat down in the metal chair. He thought carefully about alternative explanations. It was possible someone had certified the repair under Gary's name with Gary's remote authorization, irregular, but not unheard of. It was possible the date on the certification was a clerical error and the repair had actually been completed earlier, before Gary went on leave. It was possible there was a supplementary record in another folder that explained the discrepancy, something he hadn't found yet. Ray was a fair-minded man. He gave each possibility its time. He sat with them for several minutes, turning them over, testing them. Then he kept reading. The internal incident report, the one filed in the days immediately after Marco's death, before the OSHA investigators arrived, stated that all safety guards on Line 7 had been maintained and certified according to schedule. It cited the March 8th certification by name. It listed Gary Trout as the certifying technician and stated the guard was in compliant condition at the time of the incident. This was the document the investigators had received. This was the document that had supported the finding of mechanical fault, a fault in the guard's mechanism, not in the maintenance record. He remembered the OSHA investigation. He remembered how it had felt at the time, professional, thorough in the way that official things are thorough, conclusive in a way that had seemed right to him, because he had not yet had a reason to question it. The investigator had contacted him once, briefly, over the phone. Ray had told him what he knew. He had flagged the guard on March 3rd, submitted the work order, and been home sick the night of the accident. The investigator had thanked him. That had been the full extent of it. The fine had come 3 months later. The company had paid it without appeal. He had not known, then, that the man whose name was on the certification had been home with a broken wrist. He thought about Marco, not sentimentally, but specifically, the way you think about a person when you are trying to reconstruct something. Marco had been careful about equipment. He had been the kind of worker who checked the guard before every run, every time, without being reminded. Ray could see him standing at the front of Line 7 at the start of a shift, one hand on the housing. If the guard had shown visible wear or obvious damage, Marco would have stopped. He would have flagged it. He would have called it in, and waited. Which meant whatever had failed was internal. Something that looked fine from the outside. Something that had been logged as repaired and certified and hadn't been. Something Marco had no reason to question, because the record said it was fine. Ray pulled the production records for March. He had known, even before he opened them, what they would show. The month had been heavy, a contract run for a major distribution client, the kind of order with penalty clauses attached if the delivery window was missed. He could still recall the meeting, the whiteboard, the operations director using the word priority in a tone that made the room go slightly quiet. Line 7 was one of the key lines on that run. He had noted that at the time and said nothing beyond what he had already done, submitting the work order, making the log note. He had done his part. The record showed Line 7 running at full capacity from March 8th onward. 4 days of full output. The guard failed on the night of the 11th. He was turning to the back of the binder when he saw the paper, a single sheet, folded in half, tucked between the inside back cover and the last page. It might have been misfiled. Papers migrated in old binders. He unfolded it. It was a printed email. The timestamp read March 6th, 2 days before the certification. It was addressed from the operations director to the plant's safety officer, Mitchell Crane. Crane had since been promoted to regional director and transferred to another city. The email read, "We need Line 7 at full capacity by the 10th. Talk to Gary's stand-in and get me a certification so we can move." Ray read it twice. He thought about what Gary's stand-in meant. Someone had done that repair, or had signed as though they had. Someone had written Gary Trout's name on a document. Mitchell Crane had been instructed to obtain a certification, and 2 days later there was a certification, and 5 days after that a man who had worked at this plant for 11 years was dead. Ray folded the paper back exactly as he had found it and placed it carefully in his breast pocket. He stood in the archive room for a while, hands at his sides, the fluorescent light humming above him. Then he checked his watch. It was 10:54 in the morning. His retirement party was at 3. He thought about Celia Reyes. He had seen her twice in the 3 years since Marco died, once at the grocery store on Elm, once at a gas station near the plant. She had smiled both times. A quiet, careful smile, the kind that doesn't ask for anything from anyone. He knew she had signed a non-disclosure agreement as part of the settlement. He knew she had 2 children and a mortgage and had gone back to work at a dental office 6 months after the funeral. He knew she had rebuilt something from what was left. He knew what that kind of rebuilding cost. He thought about Marco's son, who had been 11 years old when his father was killed. The boy was 14 now, almost 15. Ray did not know what he had been told about how his father died. He did not know if he had been given a real account, or a simplified one, or nothing at all. Just the fact of the accident and the settlement check and the years that followed. He did not go to management. He had worked at this plant long enough to understand what that path looked like. The operations director had retired to Florida 2 years ago. Mitchell Crane was a regional director with an office and a legal team and no reason to cooperate with anything that did not come with a subpoena. The OSHA investigation had closed 3 years ago with a citation and a payment and a statement that the company had corrected the relevant conditions. There were people whose job it was to keep that file closed, and they were good at their job, and they had had 3 years to get better at it. He did not call Celia. That was not the right move, not before there was someone official holding the same information, not before there was something real to hand her that she could use without risking the settlement she had already signed. He called his nephew Thomas instead. Thomas had worked for the State Occupational Safety Board for 9 years. Ray told him he had documents that needed to be seen. He used careful language and said only what was necessary. Thomas listened without interrupting, and then asked one question. "Are you certain?" Ray said yes. Thomas said he would call that evening. He went to the party. He ate the cake Karen had ordered, the same vanilla sheet cake from the same bakery 3 blocks away that had marked every retirement and birthday at the plant for longer than Ray had worked there. He shook hands. He stood still for photographs. He listened to the floor manager give a speech about what it meant to have someone you could count on, and he nodded in the right places, and he meant what he felt, even though part of him was elsewhere. He drove home and had dinner with Rita. He didn't say much, which she didn't remark on, because she had known him for 31 years. Thomas called at 8:40. The conversation lasted 11 minutes. Ray said he would cooperate fully, for as long as it took, and that he wanted his name kept out of the process for as long as possible. Not because he was afraid of the consequences for himself, but because he wanted the documents to speak first, before anyone started looking for a person to discredit. An inquiry was opened 6 weeks later. Ray did not know, in that first year, exactly how far it would go. The statute of limitations was a question. The agreement Celia had signed made her situation complicated. The key players had moved on to other titles in other cities, and a 3-year-old email could be read in many ways by people paid to read it charitably. The path forward was not clear. It had not been designed to be clear. But the file was open. Once a file was open, it could not be unfiled. Ray had understood that about paperwork for 35 years, that the act of recording was also the act of committing, that once you wrote something down and handed it forward it had weight, it had existence, it could not be entirely recalled. The file was open, that was something. On the morning after the party, he sat on the back porch with his coffee and watched the yard come light. Rita brought her cup out and sat beside him and neither of them said anything for a while, which was exactly what he had wanted for 35 years. He thought once about Marco, about what it meant to be a careful man in a place that had decided careful was not the priority. About a boy who was almost 15 and who deserved a real answer, even if that answer took a while to arrive. Then he finished his coffee and went inside.